going through, hold on a second.
I think there's a lot of people pouring in right now. Yeah, I can hear some buzzing outside.
All right.
Hey.
You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. How are all you fellow unicorns doing this morning? Doing okay? Good. Well, we're very happy to have you all here today. Not only you, but those who are watching via live stream. So we also want to send a great welcome to all the unicorns watching all over the world, from what I hear, as far away as Israel and just down the street as well. So we're all happy we're all here today to hear from our wonderful authors of the book, Unicorns Unite. Just to give a little bit of background before we get started, we just wanted to say how pleased we were to have you all here, that we are all here recognizing this Global Day of Unicorn Unity, and really talking about how nonprofits and foundations can build epic partnerships. This book, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you do. And if you're here locally, we are selling them out in the front. And it's just an amazing book. And I was looking at some reviews last night, and the ones that I thought were great were ones like, it's like a dating guide for nonprofits and foundations. That was one of my favorites. One book you need to read to change the way change happens, another good quote. And another one, this is exactly what our industry has been missing. So if that's not enticing enough, the illustrations will be the things that bring you back in. So my name is Giddy Pudding Pop. If you've done your little order of how your name should be, that is mine, and I'm very proud of that name. But I'm also known as Michelle Dilworth, and I serve here as the president, or not the president, I wish the president, the director of Foundation Center West, which
Just give yourself that promotion.
Okay, thank you. Justman's allowing me to say that, so thank you. So Foundation Center West is one of 5 regional centers around the country for Foundation Center. And Foundation Center, for those of you who might not be familiar with us, is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to strengthen philanthropy by spreading knowledge about philanthropy in the U.S. and around the world. We really embrace this book because I feel we kind of sit in between nonprofits and foundations every day, and we really help to try to bridge that divide between the funding landscape, and this is really what this book is doing, and it's a wonderful addition to what's out there on the social sector, and we're excited for it to be part of what we all learn and talk about. So thank you, and we're looking forward to hearing more from our guests about the book, but one of the things beforehand, I just want to give you a brief overview about how the next 2 hours will transpire. So for the first hour, we'll be talking with our guests about the book, and we'll start with some moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience because we're sure a lot of you have questions about what will be happening or what the book is about. And if you have read it, I'm sure there'll be a lot of great insights that you want to get, or even if you haven't read it, you probably want those. And then after that hour, what we're going to do is we're going to stop the live stream. Sorry, live stream audience. We'll provide some information on where you can get some of the facilitation guides that we'll be doing here, and then we'll be breaking out into small groups. So we'll be doing that here in San Francisco, but also via our watch parties that are happening all over the country. And we just want to send a special thank you to 3 of Foundation Center's regional offices, Foundation Center Midwest in Cleveland, Foundation Center South in Atlanta, and Foundation Center in Northeast. In the Northeast in Washington, D.C. for hosting launch parties, but then we also have a couple of other wonderful unicorn champions in the form of the Community Foundation of Northeast Iowa and Cedar Falls, the Impact Hub Monroe in Austin, Texas, and also a watch party in Guatemala hosted by Semilla Nueva, and we're so pleased that you all will be part of this with us in spirit today. In order for both in-person and live stream audience to benefit from questions, what we'll be doing here in the room is we'll have someone coming around with a microphone so that we can all hear in the room, and also those on the live stream can hear the questions that you ask. And for those watching on via live stream, there's a chat box right by the YouTube screen where you can put in your questions there, ask those questions, and then we'll have those questions brought up to the front so we can be sure that you're part of the conversation as well. So I think that takes care of all the housekeeping. And so now on to the program. It's my extreme honor and pleasure to introduce you to two of the authors of Unicorns Unite who are here with us today. We'll start with Jane Liu, an Ashoka Fellow and the founder of Upwardly Global and Smarter Good, and for other social sector startups. Her unicorn name is Rising Magic Sunrise Harvester of Crappy Printer. And next to her, we have Rising Regal Magic Moonbeam Sunrise Breath of Emails, also known as Jessamine Shams Lau, who currently co-creates and stewards the Peary Foundation's grantee-centric approach to philanthropy. Please join me in welcoming both Jane and Jessamine.
Thank you.
So now that we've started with these wonderful unicorn names, maybe that's where we should start in terms of what's the origin of these unicorn names and unicorns in general?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so Vu Le, who is the third co-author on this book, many of you are probably familiar with Vu and his amazing blog, Nonprofit AF. Vu has a very unique sense of humor that a lot of us subscribe to. And on his blog, he really tries to help us laugh at ourselves a little bit more. There's way too much seriousness in our sector, and we're all like, oh, I'm so serious and like rigorous and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Vu kind of cuts through all of that and just says, let's tell it like it is. And also, let's, have a little bit of fun at the same time, because we deserve to have a laugh. And honestly, it makes our work a little bit easier as well. So part of that whole approach on his blog is to say, we're all one species in this sector. We're all doing this incredibly hard work. A lot of us in incredibly resource-constrained environments. It almost seems that we're trying to perform magic on a daily basis, and we're all a little bit misunderstood, and nobody outside of our sector really gets what it is we're trying to do. Our parents have no idea what we do for a day job. All they know that is apparently that we are employed, apparently. And so kind of to describe that unique situation, he came up with this moniker of unicorns. So not a Silicon Valley unicorn. There's a whole different definition for those. We are the magical, mythical unicorns of the social sector, all trying really hard to perform incredible feats of social change on a daily basis with very few resources. And so we loved this. Jane and I were really just enamored with this idea of the social sector being unicorns, and so we took that as part of the book's ethos and thought this would be a really fun way to kind of build out an engaging way to bring us all together.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I was sharing that I almost put on a unicorn onesie today.
I wish you had.
But I lost it. I just really
I got my sunglasses, my
special,
and so, Unicorns Unite sunglasses.
Right, let's have the serious conversation now.
Exactly. Whose money is it?
Right, exactly. But just to start, I guess, one of the main themes I think about the book was really about building authentic relationships. And so maybe we should start there in terms of how you all know each other, how both Jane and Jessamine know each other, and how Vu came into the picture. And then we can go from there.
Yeah.
Well, I can start. I know Jessamine through the Peary Foundation. So when I was running my nonprofit Upwardly Global, I got introduced to the Peary Foundation. Even how I got introduced was unusual. It was another colleague of mine who was a grantee of the Peary Foundation, and he said, "Oh, you should meet Peary. I'll just put you in touch." And that's not always so easy to do from the nonprofit side, to make an introduction to a foundation. And we got to know each other through that, and actually, the Peary Foundation has sort of been supportive of all my ventures over time. But the coolest thing was in their early days, they would invite me to come in and consult on how to build the Peary Foundation and how to sort of get through some of their startup pains like we all have. And in my 20 years, that was the first time a foundation had ever really asked for my advice on that level. And so we got to be friends and colleagues, and then we would talk a lot about this topic, a lot.
Yeah, we would have like a normal actual business conversation calls or meetings, and then it would like slowly towards the end of the hour devolve into a, oh my gosh, you'll never guess what my foundation colleagues, like I heard the other day about their experiences, or oh my goodness, you'll never guess like what my nonprofit friends had to endure last week. And, like, yeah. You all know those conversations.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then how does Vu fit into this picture?
Yeah, so Vu and I found ourselves on an advisory board together. And that was the first time I'd had a conversation with Vu. Known about him for a while before that, being a big fan of his blog. So we were on the advisory committee for Grant Advisor, which is a really cool website. Just miniature plug there. Go see Grant Advisor. Very cool. And so we knew that we had very aligned interests because not everybody wants to have a Yelp for foundations where the truth is spoken and shared publicly about foundation processes. And so we started talking about that. And I think one day I just shot Vu an email. I was like, we need to write a book about this. And he was like, yes, we do. And I don't have time. And I'm like, okay, let me get someone else on board too. So that was when Jane immediately came to mind because we'd already had these conversations like on multiple occasions. And that was how the three of us kind of came together and said, okay, let's figure out how to do this in all of our spare time. You know, Jane's millions of ventures and Vu's cavorting around the country, like spreading the message of honesty and transparency.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. I wonder if you could tell a little bit more about the process of the book, like how long was it in the making and what made you decide now was the time and
I can start. Well, the way we started it was kind of unusual. We did a Kickstarter campaign. And I don't know if any of our Kickstarters are here. Any of the Kickstarters here?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And we decided that, you know, a lot of the books in the nonprofit sector are funded by foundations and endorsed by foundations. And when you look at the back cover, it's all about foundations endorsing it. And we really wanted something that was more inclusive of nonprofits and foundations together. So we did a Kickstarter campaign. It was actually I guess it was 2 years ago, Thanksgiving time. We launched it in December. I remember Jessamine asked that we would record these videos of ourselves talking, and they were terrible. Like, we did these horrible videos of us talking. And then she somehow turned it into, like, this funny thing with unicorns. And we raised about $15,000 in about 2 weeks from about 250 people who just wanted to see us write the book, and that allowed us to pay the publisher to get this printed. But the process of writing it was fun. We had a lot of like graphic layouts of it. We had the whole thing in note cards for a long time, and we just had these.
None of us were actual authors, right? So none of us had any idea how this works. So we all had our own like crazy systems, whether it was like 3x5 cards or Post-it notes, or me, it was just like sketchbook pages torn out and thrown all over the table.
Right. And I think the breakthrough was when Jessamine decided she would illustrate the whole thing herself. So if you haven't seen the book, Jessamine did all of those illustrations in watercolor. And that's when the book started to come together, because we could picture what we wanted to say. And then we realized that we didn't really have it in us to write an academic book. So there's nothing researched in there. There's fake footnotes where we just fake footnote things that we're like, this isn't really true, but we'll make a little footnote, make it seem real. It's not your typical book that we have in the nonprofit sector where people do deep research and for years and years and years. That's not how it came together.
Yeah, but it was great in some ways having the three of us doing it together, because we all brought very different things to the table. And so Vu effectively had already written his contribution to the book. I mean, he inspired the whole unicorns piece, and he'd already written all of this wonderful content. And so we're like, okay, well, let's figure out how we can integrate that and then build a narrative that brings all of those pieces together and make sure that that narrative really represents not only the foundation experience, but the nonprofit experience too, in concert. So we can all take ownership of what we're not doing so well right now, and all take ownership of building a better future and vision for how these relationships can work too. So it was really important to have that balance in there so that no one feels attacked, right? We're all saying this about ourselves.
Yeah, I think it was very well done in that regard. And the illustrations are absolutely beautiful. So is this a hobby of yours to do unicorn drawings?
No, I'd never drawn a unicorn before, but it turned out to be quite fun. My undergraduate, I was a fine artist. So I was a painter and a photographer, and my parents were like, oh my gosh, she's going to be living at home for the rest of her life. She's never going to pay off her student loans. What is she ever going to do with this qualification? And yeah, lo and behold, a few years later, I will not say how many, I have this opportunity to actually use some of those skills. And I think it's actually the first time my parents have actually understood what I do as well. They're like, oh my goodness, you wrote a book. I understand what a book is. And they can like hold it and touch it and open it and be like, don't necessarily understand anything of what you're saying inside, but like the pictures.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, my mum, as Jane was saying earlier, is like our biggest fan. She like keeps sending me unicorn-themed cute things. So this is my latest gift from her, a little unicorn topper.
Very nice. Goes well with your glasses. Would you share with us what you think are one or two of the central points of what you wanted people to take away from this book?
Yeah. Do you want to pick one?
Sure, I'll start.
Yeah.
Well, one of the central points, if you've seen the book, there's a top 10 list of ways in which we disappoint each other. So there's the way that foundations disappoint and the way that nonprofits disappoint. And I think that a central point of the book is just to get that out in the open. We talk about this in our own corners all the time. If you go to a nonprofit conference, there's a lot of like, oh, this foundation did this and that, and I wish they had done that and this and that. And I know when the foundations get together, it's a similar conversation. And yet, we work in this sector that is not that regulated. Like, we really determine the rules ourselves. And we've put all these rules on ourselves of how we work that don't serve any of us, really, that well. So we wanted to get that list out of here's the things that nonprofits do. Like, we overinflate our results or projections of what we can do. We're not all that transparent all the time. We're really competitive with each other. I mean, there's a lot of snarking about, why did that nonprofit get that grant? I can't believe they got $1 million to work on child poverty. That's awful. You know, I mean, always so snarky with each other when we're really all working on the same goals. And then on the foundation side, there's a similar list of ways in which foundation people feel they've disappointed the sector. So that was one point that was important to me.
Yeah, definitely. I don't even know if I need to list the foundation side. Like, we all know what we do as foundations. We're horribly opaque and take 1 million years to do anything. As Vu says, we take longer time to complete a grant than it takes to conceive and give birth to a baby, which I think is kind of like, when you put it in those terms, you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's not good. And I think one of the biggest points for foundations reading the book is, like, how do we, again, we have decided these processes, right? We are all complicit in this Emperor's New Clothes experience of like, well, no, these are the things that have to be done, right? We're not rigorous if we don't have this paperwork, or if we haven't done this study, or, you know, that kind of thing. And really, we have so much opportunity to reimagine this partnership in a way that foundations come to the table with a very deep amount of empathy, right? Maybe, okay, I've never run a nonprofit. I've never run a fundraising campaign. Like, doing this Kickstarter and then raising money for our first print run was the first time I'd ever fundraised. So I do not know what that is like. But that doesn't stop me from listening to friends and colleagues and saying, oh my gosh, you know exactly what it is like. Teach me, tell me, help me understand how my work can do a better job of supporting you. And I feel like that's one of the biggest reasons that, you know, Jane and I have become so close, is because we have this mutual respect for each other. And I have so much to learn from her in terms of how we improve our work at the foundation. And I don't think that's that hard, right? To just say, oh, maybe I don't have all the answers on how my work should best be delivered to the major stakeholders of our activities, the nonprofits in the world. So I think for foundations, it's just, you know, how do we approach our work with a little bit more humility and openness to incorporating the opinions, the experience, the voices of those it impacts most directly.
Great.
Yeah. And I'll throw in one more. I mean, the whole central theme is around power and money and power, and how when you have money, it equates to being a powerful person, and sort of how those dynamics play out throughout the whole sector and in our relationships with each other. Even in small things of who determines when you meet, where you meet, who has to write to a specific word count or character count. You know, all those things, those are manifestations of power in our relationships. So that's a real central point of the book.
And the nice thing is, like, we all actually have power. I think my fear in us writing this book was that nonprofits would kind of feel like, well, there's nothing we can do to change this. I think Jane really challenged that assumption for me. She was like, no, are you kidding? There are things we can do, because like there's a certain, I'm not saying that you can change things overnight. I fully understand that that's not the case, but there are steps that nonprofits can take to help almost like train their funders or help their funders understand more of the impact that they have on them. But it takes a lot of bravery and courage. I recognize that. And I think, you know, again, Jane is probably better to speak on that point, but I think the book is really about this rallying of courage, confidence, determination to say there are things we can do to improve this. Let's dream bigger and then try things that will help us get towards that better dream for our sector.
Great. Just if we could pause right there and just, I'm curious, what are some of those, would you want to lift up a couple of things with the ways that you feel that we, nonprofits on?
I mean, I've seen with nonprofits that first of all, I mean, I do think we kind of put ourselves in a subjugated position a lot of times when we deal with foundations, and we look at all those guidelines as law, and you know we approach those foundations in a way that doesn't necessarily set us up as peers. So you know, asking for what you want, which is always a good advice in the world, but I think as nonprofits, we often don't go to funders and ask, I really could use general operating support instead of project support. Would you consider that? And just to like start to open those conversations about asking for what we want, they can always say no. But that's just a simple one. And I've seen such good results when nonprofits do go and ask for what they want. The foundations usually want to meet them where they are. It's a lot of times the foundations just really don't have that much direct operating experience to know how those structures affect you on the ground level side. So that's just a simple one, just asking.
Great. Thank you for sharing that one. And read the book and you'll hear all the other ones too. This book is talking about epic partnerships. Could you all give a framework of what you consider to be an epic partnership?
Like an example of one?
Yeah.
Do you want to start? You start.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I don't know that we have seen full epic partnership in action. I think different people have experienced elements of epic partnership. I think there are people who think they're being partners and really aren't. But I think for the most part, it's really exciting because I don't know of any one foundation that has got this all figured out. I don't know of any one nonprofit that's got this all figured out, right? This is something we actually get to co-create and discover together. I think there are amazing examples, and I'm going to embarrass the Greenlight Fund folks right here on the front row, because there are so many aspects of their work that I think are really starting to uncover what epic partnership looks like when you truly approach that relationship as equals. And I know that Casey and her team are asking themselves the question, how do we enable this nonprofit to succeed in this area? I think, honestly, one way that you do that, and I'm not saying this works for every foundation, but in their particular situation with the nonprofits they're funding, they don't fund very many. And then they pump all of their intention and attention and resources and ideas and support and energy behind those few that they are funding to ensure that doors are opened, the funding is provided, the events are hosted and facilitated for them. Like there's so much that goes into that support rather than just, here's a check and give us a 20-page report in 6 months' time. So they're alleviating the challenges inherent in the nonprofit work rather than adding to those challenges with funding requirements, which is really cool.
Yeah, thank you for that. You have anything to add?
I think the way that we envisioned the EPIC partnerships, and one of the central points of the book also is that money is not the most important input into social change. And, I think that's a wild notion for a lot of people because they feel like money buys all the other inputs. But if you've ever worked in a nonprofit, you know that money doesn't really buy your time because it's never fully compensated. It doesn't buy optimism, creativity, hope, kind of the perseverance that you put into things. And the same on the philanthropy side. The more that I've gotten to know people in philanthropy, they're also not fully compensated for a lot of things they're doing. They're bringing a lot of things other than just the money, but they get pigeonholed as it's just money. So I think we've envisioned these EPIC partnerships more as a set of unicorns looking at a problem with an undetermined timeline and saying, how do we work together to solve that problem? And pulling each other in. So lots of nonprofits working together, lots of foundations working together. Instead of that transactional place where we are now, which is, let me, as a nonprofit, provide, give you something that fits into 1 year. It's this little package to purchase, which is not an EPIC partnership. It's not an open-ended sort of destination of change and results.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions in a second. So think about what those questions are that you would like to ask. And Ganga will be coming around with a microphone. And then also just for the live stream audience, if you want to think about your questions, go ahead and start typing them in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get those questions asked too. I guess my last question before we open it up is really about, you have 170 signatories, or at least last time I checked, on your, on the EPIC Partnerships website. And so I'm just wondering, what do you see as the future for this movement you've started, and what would you like to see happen from here on out?
This is like the $1,000,000 question for us right now.
Yeah. Want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think there's 184. So what she's referring to is we have a place on epicpartnerships.org where you can sign on to the Unicorn Manifesto and see all the other unicorns that signed on. And we've just been really pleased of how many people have said, yeah, I believe that too. I want to create those kinds of partnerships. So I invite everyone to sign on there. To talk a little bit about the reaction to this book, I've been really surprised at the foundation reaction, which is very positive. And every other day we get an email from a foundation that has a network that wants to get their grantees and their foundation network together to talk about the book and to see if they can't make some progress on creating these kinds of partnerships. I think that's amazing. I kind of worried that I might never work in this sector again after I published this book. I thought, like I may not hear from some of those foundation friends for a while. But big foundations, small foundations, community foundations, corporate foundations, a number of them have reached out to say they want to live by these ideas. I think the next side of the movement is really about the nonprofits, because my nonprofit friends say, yes, they love the book because it validates their experience. And then I say, what are you going to do about it? And many of them say, oh, nothing will ever change. I don't really trust that those foundations will really change. They won't really change. And I think that the next step for the nonprofit side is action, because the foundations are so game to have these honest conversations and to find a new way of working together. And the nonprofits, in my mind, have to kind of step forward and meet the foundations with their open hand and say, let's build something together. So to me, the movement is like seeing the nonprofits kind of get out of their corner of like nothing will ever change to being part of the change. Because I don't think, as the nonprofit side, I don't think any of us want to live in this kind of dynamic forever. Like, it doesn't serve us or our communities.
And kind of, you know, every time I listen to Jane, I'm like, yeah, definitely, and more. She always inspires me to think bigger. So as I was listening to what you were just saying, Jane, I was thinking, you know what would be amazing? Every nonprofit has that one funder that are like, oh my gosh, they're great. Like, I have a lot of other issues with some of my other funders, but this foundation, I feel like we have a really good relationship. And wouldn't it be amazing if those two, that nonprofit and that foundation, could get together and read the book together, and then maybe do some of the exercises together? You know, there's always one relationship that you have where you can have those honest conversations and perhaps even feel empowered to say, hey, we're thinking about reading this book as a team, and we thought it would be really cool to adopt the ethos of the book and do it in concert with your team. And we already have such a great relationship. Let's learn how to do this better together. I don't know. Does that sound like it would be comfortable or uncomfortable for nonprofits? But that's what I was thinking.
I think it would be fun for nonprofits if the foundation team was willing to sit with our nonprofits team. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds like a good conversation.
So anyway, and foundations as well. Like, I mean, foundations, you shouldn't really feel like, you know, insecure about asking your grantees to do anything, because you already asked them to do probably a little bit too much. But I don't think they would mind you asking to do this with them, right? To go into a process of self-reflection, of joint reflection, to say, you know what, we would love to work through these exercises with you and want to listen to how your reactions come out to, and your experiences are as you do these exercises. Let's learn together, and just really start to open the conversation and say, okay, this is not foundation-led, this is not nonprofit-led. We want to come together and ask some of these questions and learn from each other's experience.
Because it's been eye-opening for me how many foundations say that they believe in they get it. They read this book and they think, yes, we can change this power dynamic, but that they feel with their boards the same way nonprofits feel with funders. So the nonprofits feel afraid of their funders, and the program officers feel kind of afraid of their boards. And that was, that's been a refrain throughout this first couple months of the book being out there. So I think that would be great to talk about together, because fear is what's keeping us back from moving forward.
And I think also to that point, it's also about building empathy, right? Like the idea to understand what the other side of the table is really thinking and feeling. And I think you talk a lot about that in the book too, which I really appreciate. So I'm going to stop hogging these two wonderful people, and I'm opening it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hands. And again, live stream audience, if you want to just go ahead and type in your questions, we'll take them that way too. And if you don't have questions, I have plenty more, but I'm trying to be very open.
So we have a question from the live stream audience.
Okay,
all right. So I'm going to actually hand it to Michelle if you'd like to read it for the group.
Thank you, Ganga. So this is from Kari from the Iowa Council of Foundations. How do you respect nonprofits' time and yet build authentic relationships? It's a good question.
Ooh. I think you should answer this one first.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you expect their respect? I think this is a good question, because I think a lot of times what foundations want to do to build relationships takes a lot of time from nonprofits. I know myself as sort of a multiple fellow of lots of different networks, that you could spend all of your time going to retreats with your funders every day, where you do get to know each other, but it takes a lot of time. So I think the time piece is interesting. I mean, I'm always one for applied partnership. So instead of getting together and talking for the purpose of talking, working on things together, reviewing each other's work. If the foundation is working on a strategic plan, asking the leader of the nonprofit if they would spend 1 hour looking through it and giving input. I mean, think of how mind-blowing that would be. Have any nonprofits ever been asked to review a foundation strategic plan in this room? If you have, raise your hand. I haven't either. So, but foundations review strategic plans all day long and give really good input. So things like that, like working side by side on something versus let's spend a lot of time talking. But I'm not really one for talking. I'm usually one for working and doing things together. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One principle that we've tried very hard to implement at the Peary Foundation, and the Peary Foundation, this is definitely not an ad for the Peary Foundation. I mean, I love it, but we also have a lot of work to do in order to keep moving towards this goal of epic partnership. But one thing I do think we've made some progress on is this idea of doing the homework, right? I think we have this weird notion that if we ask for more paper, we'll get to know the organization and the team better. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that we've tried. One, we have, often before we even talk to an organization, we try and gather as much information as we can about that organization as possible. So whether it's websites or annual reports that are readily available online, you guys are so great about that, or looking for videos. Videos are so helpful to get an initial sense of who someone is, how they talk about their work, what drives their passion, their communication skills, their marketing skills, all of that. There's so many resources around most nonprofits that already exist. We don't need to ask them to reformat that for us in our little diagram and packet and whatever. So I think just this idea of how much homework can you do before you even ask for anything from the nonprofit. And obviously that does take time on the foundation side. So the other thing that I think has worked quite well is that we have a screening process that effectively is a person on the end of a phone. So if anyone is ever interested in funding from the Peary Foundation, you call up our office number. Natalia is most likely the person who will answer the phone, and she will talk to you for 15 minutes or so, and she'll get to know what you're doing. She'll tell you a bit about what we do, and at the end of that conversation, she'll be able to tell you, does it make sense for us to continue the conversation? And honestly, 95% of the time, it doesn't, because we can't fund everything and we've got specific areas that we are focused on. But that person now knows they don't need to spend any more time trying to get in front of Peary Foundation employees, and Natalia can then direct them to the next person in our team if it does make sense. And that person then takes on the job of doing the homework. I think just asking for what you need as well, rather than what you have always asked for, is another thing. We recently went through a process and said, okay, what pieces of this information actually make it into our decision making? If it's not core to the decision making, we're not going to ask the question. I don't care if you're curious. I don't care if someone else is going to ask you that question later down the road and you want to feel confident enough to answer the question. You've got to get comfortable with saying, I don't know the answer to that question, and we still decided to fund them. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Mm-hmm. We're in philanthropy. We can take on risk. And then the last thing that I would add is ask the nonprofit. Give them the choice. Is it more helpful for us to come to you or for you to come to us? Is it more time efficient for I'm trying to think of another specific example. Is it more helpful for you to answer this via email or for us to jump on the phone and talk for 15 minutes? Mm-hmm. Give the nonprofit the option and ask what they would prefer. It's, again, I don't think any of it's rocket science. It's not. It doesn't take a strategic plan to implement some of these.
Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
The authentic relationship. Great. Yeah. Does anyone have a question here in the audience?
So there's one question up in the front.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Valentin Aguirre. I'm with the Shanti Project here in San Francisco. For every one foundation that's open to communication and engagement, there may be 2 to 10 who are not, and I think as a result, many of us in the nonprofit sector are concerned about attempting, even making the initial gestures of attempting. On the side of that is also the massive growth of donor advised funds, which are set up in ways that foundations have become gatekeepers much more, and then forcing nonprofit fundraisers like myself to really just hustle much, much more for smaller grants and fewer opportunities. So I'm asking for a glimmer of hope with that in mind, because I really love the what you put forth, and I'm also pragmatic in that donor advised funds are such a growing thing. Please help.
Well, I can give a little glimmer of hope.
Yeah. Can I say something about the double standards?
Yeah.
So we talk a bit in the book about double standards and making those really obvious in our sector. Because, on the one hand, nonprofits are expected to have their financial statements on their websites, unveil their salaries everywhere, talk about all kinds of personal, private information to the organization. And there's even instances now where foundations comment publicly on that, and it's all sort of out there. On the other side, you're describing, like, we're moving the other side of the spectrum, which is more and more privacy, that foundations don't have to put any information out there. The donor advised funds don't have to be visible at all. So I think, like, in the spirit of unicorn unity, we just have to look at what has integrity, and are we at, can we find a middle ground there? Is it really okay for foundations to become more and more private and demand more and more transparency? Like, aren't we all in this together? And can't we understand, on the one side, we can understand why we might want to keep things private. On the other side, can understand why transparency is good. So I don't think we should have rules that apply to one side of the unicorn family and not the other.
So a little bit of hope. One training session, a full-day training session that I am involved in September is with a local community foundation, which is very exciting, because I think there's a lot of staff at community foundations who understand what you're saying. And again, kind of to Jane's point, a lot of the time they don't know what to do or where their power lies to actually enact change. So I'm really heartened by the fact that we have been invited in to have that conversation with their staff, and that this is like an official embracing of what's our role in this. We're not a private foundation. Like, we can't move, as nimbly, allegedly, as family foundations and private foundations can. But I hope that a lot of those questions will be unearthed in that day-long training that we're going to be doing. And we actually had another very large community foundation approach us too. We haven't pinned anything down, but the interest is there. So,
and these are community foundations that have the donor advised funds, just for the
have
broader audience.
Many donor advised funds in very wealthy parts of our area. So I don't have any concrete results for you just yet, but I do want to give you, like, it's being received. Like, the door is opening, which is very exciting to us.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So we have one more question in the room and then one from the live stream. So a few in the room and a couple on the live stream.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anna Marie Jones, and first I want to say thank you. You guys are all phenomenal, and this is a painfully long overdue conversation, so yay. Is there a symbol we can use for unicorn? Like, do you do like this or something, or,
We did talk about leaving the book in your lobby, right, as a symbol, particularly for foundations. It's like an indicator that when a nonprofit enters your office, you get it, right? We're in the cool club. You can relax a bit.
Well, my commitment is every time I'm in a store that there's a computer and an internet browser, I'm going to just look up your book and leave it on the screen.
Yes, thanks. I love it.
Please, everybody, do that. My question. An issue that I've seen over the last 30 years of being involved with nonprofits is that it's a challenge to get foundations to care very specifically about strengthening the sector. So if you're a nonprofit that serves nonprofits, you have a much harder way to go. It's everything from even the intake form when they ask you things like, the demographics of the people you serve.
Yes.
And everything is based on, how many seniors or how many people of this ethnic background. So what is the best way when you've got something that really and truly helps the sector, the nonprofits, and the foundations? Both of us we are business partners and friends, and we're both former nonprofit executive directors, and we both had that experience of it being a struggle. And we recently wrote a book very specifically to help nonprofits have far more productive, fabulous meetings. Virtually every nonprofit that I dealt with for decades struggles with that level of effectiveness. So how do we help foundations and the sector get better when it is such a struggle to get foundations to literally target the helping of the individual nonprofits?
Yeah. Interesting question. Oh, I think your current organization.
Yeah, I mean, I feel your pain, because at Smarter Good we do that too. We work behind about 35 organizations, helping them do their fundraising and accounting. It's a lot of reason why I wanted to write the book, because I saw the struggle and the pain on both sides. A lot of really smart people wasting a lot of time and frustrating themselves for reasons that they don't really need to. It's interesting, you know, I think in both sides, with nonprofits and foundations, we have to carve out a little piece of our work to make the sector better and not just do our missions all the time, because it feels like this dysfunction in the sector is kind of a root cause that makes all this other stuff so much harder to do. And that if we each spent a little bit of time on it and played on the whole unicorn team instead of always like, what can I get for my foundation? What can I get for my nonprofit? We might get further faster together. That's not a great answer to your question. What do you think people should be doing? Because you're also in this place.
I feel very strongly that there needs to be that, where every foundation has to think of itself as, I have to be helping the entirety of the sector, and there are a few topics where that is true. I've moved into this world of let's transform meetings, mainly because I spent years in the world of disaster services, and boy, you talk about a dog topic for nonprofits. But if every foundation helped them just a little bit, they would then be eligible for literally many millions of dollars in grants and support services. But the absence of that tiny little sliver from foundations means that most nonprofits barely touch that topic. So they are literally left out of a multi-million dollar critically important conversation, because more than 95% of foundations didn't see themselves as needing to even do a little bit. And some of it, as you mentioned earlier, is not about the money. It is about the recognition. It is about the putting it forth in front of their membership. It is any number of different things. So, you know.
So I think it's important to actually name why this is a struggle for foundations as well, because we struggle with this at the Peary Foundation as well. Like I have... yes, I understand what you're wrestling with. Obviously, but not your experience of it on the other side, or a different part of the situation. So the struggle that we have, and maybe you're already aware of this, but for anybody who doesn't know about the fun inner workings of foundations, is we have this really weird governance structure. Right? You've got this amazing team who is spending a minimum of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, thinking about, studying out, researching, listening to, like really empathizing with the issues of whatever issue area or community they're charged to serve. And then you have an amazing group of board members who have, made this incredible decision to put, their time and perhaps their wealth and whatever it is towards the foundation, and they hold all of the decision-making power. So you've got one group that has all the decision-making power, and then you have one group that has all the knowledge, and then they have maybe 5 or 10 hours a year to exchange that. It doesn't work. Right?
Yeah. I feel you.
It just doesn't work. And I have no idea who designed this, but it's a horrible way to work. One day, I hope we figure out a new way to work. And if anyone has any examples, please tell me. I'm looking for answers here. But in the meantime, it's very difficult to spend those tiny few hours you have with your board helping them to understand something that is so far removed from what they understand, which is direct service. So that's why it exists. My current solution to that is to spend more time with my board members. So I am figuring out, okay, how can I get on your calendar and spend more time? Let's go for lunch. Will you come into the office? Will you do this exercise with me? You know, will you come on this site visit? And I am probably going to become a thorn in their side during the next 12 months because I want them to have more exposure to what it is that our nonprofits are doing. And it's not their fault. They all have other jobs and expertise and things. And so it's like they're really trying to juggle a lot of things. But if I can get more information and experience into their perspective, then we can start having conversations about things that are a couple of steps removed from the basic work of direct service that they somewhat understand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions from the live stream audience. I know there are a couple of questions here, and I just want to be respectful of time. So this is from our live stream watch party in Guatemala. So I think it's good for them to be lifted up here. For a small organization, how do you pitch the dialogue about an EPIC partnership?
Depends on the organization, doesn't it? But
Yeah, I think it starts with the problem. It starts with being married to the problem and not married to your solution. And sitting down with who those partners might be, the funders, and just really being honest and saying, like, this is the problem that, you know, that we've dedicated our careers to, and this is the problem that keeps me up at night. And if we're honest, we're just chipping away a little bit at it, but we're not really creating the kind of results that we want. We can't do it ourselves. And really, and then from there, like, inviting them into how they see it and inviting other people to the table too. So it's not just one funder, one nonprofit, but a set of people who have information and knowledge on that topic. Because then I think you bust through that regular dynamic that's already gone. It's not just about how do I get a grant, which is unfortunately where it all devolves to. That's how I would start.
And I think regardless, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, on this, please, but regardless of whether it's a nonprofit or a foundation, for me, the entry point is how can we create more value how can we create outsized value, basically? How can we create outsized outcomes? We have a tiny team. We're not going to grow anytime soon. We have a set amount of time and resources and, you know, energy in the pot, right? One of the best ways to increase our outcomes is to strengthen those partnerships with people who grease the wheels for how our work moves forward, right? If we can figure out how to collaboratively improve the process, then things will move much faster and further. Better ideas will come into the mix. And we as a foundation can have a better impact and see better outcomes in the community. We as a nonprofit can be spending more time on those relationships that actually provide additional value to the grant and things that really grow our mission and our impact again.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question from the live stream, and then we'll go back to the in-person audience. This is from Marwa at Upwardly Global. I would love to know how foundations help nonprofits beyond money. What's most effective?
Ooh.
And we know you tackle that in the book, too.
There's no one answer to that question, right? And I think that's probably the biggest issue is that we all think, oh, yeah, no. Well, yes, we know our money is really valuable, but we're also really smart too. So we're going to give a lot of our advice too. And maybe, yeah, you are probably really, really smart, but like the situations are usually so different. Even one nonprofit to another, right? What good advice might be helpful in one situation is probably not necessarily needed for another nonprofit in a different life cycle stage, working with a different population on a different issue. Anyway, so I think the biggest thing outside of money is that seems to be a trend across the board is introductions. Introductions to other funders.
And other people, not always funders, just access to people.
To networks. Yeah, networks that can provide value. So whether it's a consultant or whether it's a researcher or a potential board member, but...
or a highly placed individual anywhere in any sector. I think people in philanthropy have outsized access, and when you need to get to the high commissioner and this and that, someone in philanthropy is closer to that person than you are sometimes in the field.
That's a good point. Maybe we should spend a bit of time thinking about that. So yeah, I think it's introductions, because it's easy to open doors when you work for a funder. So maybe we should be spending more of our time doing that on behalf of our nonprofits rather than giving them our advice on their strategic plans, which they're probably hearing from a whole bunch of other people already.
Well, I think that's good advice. I think, a networked leader we know is an effective leader, and the idea of opening up the networks is a great idea. We just have a few more minutes, so is there anyone here in the room that has more questions? And if not, I can ask some more from the live stream audience.
I think I saw some hands before. Yes.
Hello, my name is Gabby. Hi. So I run a small startup nonprofit, received its 501c3 back in November, so still pretty new. Yeah, thank you. And I'm very much focused on system level change and creating more collaboration across the nonprofit sector and really operating from a place of abundance. Can I be louder? Yes. Oh, yes, I can be louder. No problem. So for me, I feel like I'm truly embodying the values of the organization. And to give you some context, the organization's called Happy, which is focused on parents, helping awesome parents parent intentionally. And, I am truly embodying the values of the organization. I've never been happier. And I'm running into this problem where I can't scale my abundance with a scarcity of resources. But because I'm such a nascent stage startup nonprofit, how do I really get engaged with the right people to not only scale what I'm doing, but facilitate more collaboration in the nonprofit sector?
About that one to you.
You're giving me that one. Well, I understand the startup phase, and having done that myself a few times, and what I would say is, persistence. First of all, the startup phase is always hard because you're demonstrating your results, and right now our funding cycles are pretty focused on results, so it takes a while to get over that hump. So what you're experiencing is normal. I think when you get stuck in that place, what it's about is giving more than you're asking for. Getting involved with other nonprofits and other networks and sort of contributing to them, contributing to what they're working on. And it just brings you into the space with others who can see how you fit in and fill a gap. And again, we've been talking a little bit about some of the bad behavior of nonprofits and what keeps us from doing this systems level approach. And I think we are all really good pitchers for our own mission exclusively, but we are terrible people at talking about the landscape view of our issues. So the couple times when I've invited, I can share my own experience, I've invited nonprofit executive directors to come address a group, maybe of funders, maybe of a mixed group, and said, I want you to talk about the landscape level viewpoint on education. What do? They come in and they give me a stump speech for their own organization, just drill really, really hard on my organization does this, even though they're working nationally and they could talk about it. So if you want to be a systems level player, you talk like a systems level player. And sometimes you're talking about the 10 other organizations in your space that are doing amazing work and not just about drilling your one thing. Not that you're doing that, but I think we all do that way too much, and it makes the systems level really hard. And we don't set ourselves, on the nonprofit side, we are experts on our issue areas, and we don't always get perceived as that because we kind of are also experts on pitching our own thing.
Great. Well, we're right at the top of the hour, and this will be when we end the live stream. Thank you all for your questions, and sorry we can't get to all of them, but we do want to move on to the activities we've had planned for those that are in the room or attending one of the watch parties. So we will send off our live stream audience, and if you would all help and give a round of applause to our audience here. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to our experts, facilitators, to share with you their wonderful plan to bring this book to life.
Okay.
Whoops.
Are you ready?
All right, this part's active, so if you're not ready to be active,